Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Health Wealth podcast. I have got an amazing episode ready for you this week. I've really been looking forward to this one. I've joined by Alex McDonald, and we're going to dig into something that he's done, which is absolutely amazing, and I'm sure you're going to find very interesting. So, first off, Alex, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Oh, very well. Very well. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. We've been dealing with time zones and everything, trying to get this one sorted. And I'm so happy we've finally got it sorted. As soon as I saw your story, I was like, I've got to get him on the podcast. It's brilliant. So, I'll let you do it. You're the person who's done it. Right.
Yeah, sure.
Tell us what it is that you have achieved, the experiment that you did. Give us a little bit of
Yes.
data about it.
Yeah, sure thing. So let's just cut to the chase. So what I did was in September last year, I did 5 marathons in 5 days, completely fasted. So think of a 5 day fast, 5 consecutive days, and in each of those days, I completed a full marathon, 42.2 kilometers. So all in, it was about 212 kilometers that I covered in that 5 day period. And the only thing that I consumed during that time was water and salt, so nothing else. So the reason why I would do such a thing was that look, I came across a pretty amazing, astounding discovery, which has been around forever, which is that we have an enormous amount of energy on our bodies, but we are not able to tap into that efficiently. So, um, my reason for doing it was I'd learned that when one becomes what's called fat adapted, so adhering to a ketogenic lifestyle and being in a state of ketosis for a long enough period, your body then adapts to be able to tap into your fat fuel reserves very, very efficiently. Let's put some numbers around that just to sort of frame just how big those reserves are. So, look, I'm a very lean guy. I weigh about 75 kilograms. I'm about 14, 15% body fat. So quite lean. I don't have a lot of fat on me. But on me, I have around about 100,000 calories of available energy in my fat stores, which is a very big number. Now, the common idea around doing any endurance event is that in order to do anything of significant volume, you must, as everyone would understand, carb load the night before. So we all rely on our carbohydrates. So we understand, look, the night before, you've got to have your bowl of pasta, you've got to load up and get all that energy so that you can get through one marathon. Now, what I discovered was that there is another way to do it. So when you do become fat adapted and avoiding all of those carbohydrates coming into it, you are able to tap into these energy reserves. But coming back to the fuel, the amount of carbohydrates you have on your body, the maximum amount that your body can hold, and it cannot be any more than that. The fuel tank is only 2,000 calories. So when you compare just on me personally, the maximum fuel tank on me, 2,000 calories of carbohydrates, and that's consistent with everybody, doesn't matter how big or small you are. But the body fat reserves is obviously a function of how much fat you're carrying. So even with me being super lean, I've got 100,000 calories versus the 2,000. So it's like, right, let's tap into that 100,000 and see how far we can push it, how far we can run. So really that was the genesis of why I wanted to do this. And probably the other important point is, look, I'm not a runner. Like I've never run a marathon before doing this challenge. So day one of my 5 marathons was the first time I've ever completed a marathon. So, uh, and part of the reason for that was really wanting to demonstrate to myself as much as to everyone else that these energy reserves are not unique to me. They're available to everybody. So by doing what I did, we can talk about how I go about that. But doing what I did, this available energy is anyone can tap into it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome and brilliantly demonstrated by this, especially having never run a marathon before either. That's crazy. Not even, people probably hearing that 5 marathons in 5 days, like that's crazy. He's obviously a crazy marathon runner, but you literally had never even run a marathon. Did you have any sort of running experience before you started training for this
No,
or
look, the only running I did, so I'm in my early 40s now. So the only running I did was well over a decade ago, would have
Mm,
been sort of late early 2010, 2011, I think. And I was, an amateur runner. I did half marathons, was about as far as I went, tried to go as fast as I could, but just like everyone else, followed the same playbook back then. And then prior to this challenge, it had been a decade since I'd run anywhere. Like I haven't done any running. I wasn't even running once a week. So when I started my training, I was literally doing sort of a 2 kilometer run just to start and kind of get the engines going. So I was starting from square one. So
Yeah.
it's it was, I think it's a powerful message to go, right, if I can go from there to this, particularly when, look, there were a lot of the naysayers, even while I was training, because I was telling people what I was doing, and they're like, one, you're an idiot, you're crazy, you're insane. And it's like, right, I probably can't argue with that at this stage. But that, look, it's just not possible. Like there's no possible way that you could even get through one marathon fasted, let alone 5 full days, let alone the amount of distance of 5 marathons. So it just blows people's minds. So the real, I suppose, powerful point around what I did was, now that I have done it, it takes away that any commentary around whether it's possible or impossible. So the conversation then becomes, well, why? How is it possible? Which is a much more, I think, uh, it's a much better conversation to have, because that's where you can really tease out, look, there's some things here maybe we don't understand and maybe we need to dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, you clarified there, you were basically starting from zero in terms of your running ability, and you were able to do it and to do 5 in 5 days. People who are regular runners and anyone would struggle to do 5 marathons in 5 days. So the fact that you did it from zero
Mm.
is amazing. And definitely, as you said, we've got to start asking those questions about, how is it possible? What we're taught, especially within exercise, you alluded to it a couple of times. It's all about carbohydrates still within, running, cycling, any sports. You need your carbs. That's what they tell you, and you've clearly proven that to be wrong. So
Yeah.
when you were training, because obviously you did your marathons fasted, what was your eating like when you were training? What was your diet then?
Yeah, so I've been basically low carb. I started low carb. It was early 2010. So we're
Okay.
talking sort of, what's that, 14 years that I've been low carb, and I've been very strict around that. But I started like most people in the kind of low carb, kind of more paleo end of it. And once I had some amazing gains and felt incredible. And it was like, right, how far can I push this? And over that time, my diets moved more towards the carnivore end of the spectrum, because it was like the more of the carbs that I cut out, the better I just generally felt. And then on top of that, doing the research into this, it was, look, you must be fat adapted to do what I did. You can't, not anyone can just turn up and say, well, I'm now deciding to run 5 marathons and let's just have it go. It is, you have to have done your homework and you have to have your body to be prepared. So knowing the two of those, given I was already largely carnivore for probably 4 years before I started doing this. And I say I wasn't sort of the pariah trying to be 100% strict, but I was pretty close. But yeah, other things would creep in, but still call it 95%. So coming into my 5 marathons, it was, look, okay, if call it the science says you must be fat adapted to do this, and I was doing something that's never ever been done before, and it was quite an aggressive goal. It was, I need to maximize my chances of being call it as fat adapted as possible to give myself the greatest chance to do that. And so basically what that meant was, look, I was very, very strict for about 3 months prior to my marathons of 100% carnivore. And I'd cut out everything else. So the obvious things like no alcohol, which is, I do drink alcohol, but no alcohol. I even had no coffee. Like coming into it, I was just like, well, we're doing just nothing but meat, salt, and I did have some dairy, but not the kind of milk, but it'd be sort of cheese, and kind of that would be about it. But cheese and butter, I should say.
Okay.
But yeah, so that was it. Very, very strict on the carnivore coming into it to maximize my probability of being fat adapted.
Yeah, yeah. And what did you track sort of your ratios of fat to protein? Were you eating quite a high fat ratio?
Uh, I do have all of that data. I like, in terms of, I wasn't really obsessing around my macros. It
Yeah.
was, look, if I'm just eating, because and I have been eating carnivore for so long that it's very natural to me.
Mm.
Um, and probably the only thing that I kind of forced a little bit was I tried to eat more than I ordinarily would. So being completely carnivore, my satiety is through the roof. Like
Yeah.
just even eating more than one meal a day, I'm kind of average 1 to 2 meals a day, but more than that becomes really a lot of effort. It's not really fun anymore eating because it's just so, I'm just so full all the time. But given the amount of volume of what I was preparing to be training, I tried to dial that up. So I was probably eating as much as I could just to um, just ensure I had as much fuel. But in terms of the mix, I'm very much a believer of if you eat just whole foods, real meat, the ratio in which it comes is the perfect ratio. So I didn't try and engineer to kind of dial up my fat more or less. And often I would just do it to taste. Like sometimes I craved fat and I just put lots on there. Other times not so much. So it was a very natural approach was in terms of my macros.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's I think once you're adapted and you're into that way of eating, I think you can listen to your body a lot. That the signals become a lot clearer, don't they?
Yeah,
But an important point you made about the obviously you have to be fat adapted to do this. Like you've got to train your legs to be able to run, and you've got to
yes.
train your body to be using the right energy system and be fat adapted as well. So obviously,
Yeah.
I mean, you were already pretty much fat adapted, maybe because you were eating carnivore anyway. But how long
Yep.
were you training for and in this strict eating phase?
Yeah, so the training I started was about a year out. So I gave myself a year to build up. And most of that was less around the diet side or the nutrition side because I'd had such a long period of that. It was more, look, I need to train my body with my muscles to be able to cover that amount of volume. And for anyone that's done any running, you can't like race through that. Like it just takes a very, very long time. So as much as K's in the legs as it is time on the legs. And recovery is as important as the actual work. So you can't just run non-stop. You have to work to a certain point and let your body recover and work your way up that way. The other problem I did have was, again, I feel like I'm a bit of an old man now, but I had a lot of like calf injuries. So I kept pulling my calves as I was training. So that would be right. I'll have to wait 3 weeks. If I wait 2 and be aggressive, I'll do it again, and that cost me another 4 weeks. So you needed to be really smart about that. So I gave myself a lot of time to work up the volume, training wise, and the diet. I was 95% until the carnivore until the last 3 months, and then we really turned up the dial.
Yeah. Awesome. Did you feel any physical difference? When you changed for that last 3 months, you just cut that extra 5% out. Did you feel differently physically?
It's a really good question because there are a lot of people that say like that last sort of little bit made a massive difference. I was really hoping it was. Like I did feel better. There's absolutely no question about that. Like the best I've ever felt was when I was there. But in terms of like if I would say go from the SAD diet, the standard Australian, standard American, whichever diet you like to call it, but going from that to even just a paleo diet, that change was like, oh my gosh, this is night and day difference. And then as I get more towards carnivore, it got better and better and better. But that last 5% for me was an improvement, but it wasn't the same step up as it was from going just a horrible diet to just sort of eating clean. Like that's the huge part. But yeah, so my comfortable spot like post marathons would be I'm still happy back in that 95%. It wasn't enough for me to go, okay, I need to be super strict because, this is just so great. But it's kind of balancing life and making it as uh, accessible and as easy as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's get to the marathons. I mean, just
Yeah.
just finishing a marathon is a huge achievement for anyone. It's hard.
Yeah.
I ran a marathon once years ago when I was still eating carbs back then, and it's hard work. Just finishing is hard. So just finishing 5 is great. But what kind of, because you'd never run a marathon before either, what kind of times did you run on your marathons, and how did they differ across the 5 days?
Yes. So my times, they were not fast at all. Like for two reasons. One, I'm not a marathon runner. You need to do a lot of training. You need to be have a certain skill for it. And two, speed wasn't the objective. So for me, it was about demonstrating the energy reserve. So it was how do I cover the distance? Now, my biggest fear through all of this was definitely not running out of energy. It was I'm going to like blow a calf muscle like on marathon 2 and just not be able to get there, or even with 10Ks to go on my final marathon. It was like, right, don't push so hard that there's any risk of me blowing a muscle
Yeah.
because again, through all my training, I blew my calves probably 5 times in the year
Mm.
leading up to it. So, and I had done it about a month before my 5 marathons as well. So
Oh wow.
it was very much in my mind that, okay, if I pull a muscle here, this is a disaster.
Yeah.
So low and slow was it. So my strategy was actually quite liberating mentally too, which was, look, run to a heart rate. So for me, I was aiming for around 140 beats per minute, which for those familiar with endurance training, it would largely be like a zone 2 training. So my speed at which I was moving would be, it would be, call it a light jog. It was not quite a
Mm.
walk, but it's definitely jogging. But it's still comfortable enough that you could have a conversation while you were doing it. So you're not really pushing too hard. But so what, running in that way, I'd be monitoring because I wear like a watch that would tell me live heart rate. And if my heart rate got raced away on me, it was like, right, let's just back off until my heart rate comes down again. So there was not that mental push of, right, normally back in the day when I was running my half marathons, it was like, if it's hurting, this is good. Like, let's just stay in the hurt zone for as long as we can and push, push, push. There was none of that. It was more, okay, we've got a strategy here, must stick to my strategy. So low and slow. But coming back to times, so my times were, my first marathon was my fastest. I did about 5.5 hours for the full marathon. And then interestingly, my fifth marathon, my final marathon, was my second fastest of all the marathons. So, which I think is, it wasn't intentional, but I think it's a pretty powerful statement that I wasn't just limping over the line as a busted wreck. It was, I was able to finish pretty strongly. And look, on reflection, it's like I probably could have run a little bit harder even on that last one, but I was terrified of pulling a muscle. So it was like, I've done the work. I've done so much here. Just don't blow a gasket with the finish line in sight.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Like you said, your goal was doing the achievement, not about the times. But that's interesting. I was actually going to ask that question about, how did they compare? Whether people would assume you got slower and slower across the 5 days, but the fact that your last one was your second fastest, like you say, that is a
Yeah.
huge testament to the fact that the energy stored on your body was being used so effectively. Because throughout this conversation, people are probably forgetting again, you did not consume any food across these
No.
5 days,
Yeah,
absolute
that's right.
zero. And your fifth marathon. Do you just another question? Do you know roughly? I mean, I'm not a fan of calories, but I'm sure
Yes.
you're not either. But do you have a rough
No.
idea of how many calories you supposedly burn across those 5 days?
Yes. So I did the maths beforehand. So, and again, calories are terrible. We can have a whole
Yeah.
nother conversation around those. They're a horrible metric for measuring the amount of energy in our food or our bodies burn. But let's stick with it because everyone understands it. It's kind of the numeraire that people appreciate. So in terms of calories, my maths was, look, in any marathon, I will be using about 3,000 calories. So add on my base metabolic rate, about another 2,000 calories. So I call it 5,000 calories per day is what I was budgeting. So overall, that would be 25,000 calories. So look, one of the other really interesting points around the energy reserves that I had, again, remember, I'm super lean, so for 15%. And so I had about 11 kilos of fat on me, possible to tap into. One interesting question which I asked myself was, how many marathons could I do on using 11 kilos of fat? Like, how far could we actually push this? And let's ignore all the other calories you use around just day to day, but like just some hypothetical. And the answer is 22 marathons is what I could do based on my fat reserves, which again is an astounding number. So I did 5, which is aggressive, but it's not 22. So even if it's, I got my maths wrong and it's only 18 or 20, it's still, we're talking 4 or 5 times the amount of marathons I did, I still have available on my body. So I was very comfortable that I wasn't going to be pushing the limit in terms of, okay, I'm going to tap out here and I just don't have enough energy.
Yeah, that's amazing, especially considering that most people don't feel they can go one day without eating in standard
Yes.
life, not even running a
Yes.
marathon. Like that's
Yeah,
just
that's right.
that's just yeah, I mean this is why I love it so much because it's so crazy that it makes people have to stop and think.
Yes.
You feel like you can't get to lunch without eating. So, well, this guy ran 5 marathons in 5 days with zero food. And,
Yeah.
by your calculations, you could probably run about 18, 20. So,
Yeah.
what's going on in their bodies that they can't
Yeah,
last
and
that
look,
long?
part of the reason for doing it, one is, look, when you've done it, because you roll those numbers out to anybody, and they'll say no, there's no chance of that. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, now I can say, well, I've
Yeah.
done it. And it's pretty hard to sort of come back from that. So the conversation has to move forward rather than just be dismissed initially. But I find it also, it's a really useful example to start a conversation with. Like in my mind, I think there's two ends of the spectrum. It's those that just don't really know much about nutrition or really care too much about marathon running or even just any of that stuff. And they hear what I've done running 5 marathons fasted, and they'll say, hang on, okay, maybe I should look into this, because that, like, having that amount of energy available, there is something there that I didn't know. So call it the non nutrition people, the non-health people that just ordinary mums and dads want to have that conversation. But then at the other end of the spectrum, I should go that way, the other end of the spectrum, you've got, call it the health scientists that are doing all the work here, or the sports scientists that are saying, right, this is how you've got to do it. And, I could never have a conversation with those guys because I don't have the credibility to do so. But now if they say, look, it's impossible to do 5 marathons, and I can say, well, I have done it, all of a sudden they're intrigued and they want to know why. So I think it's a useful example that sort of cuts through, doesn't matter what anyone's knowledge base is. It's a useful example that can be a platform to move forward, to go, okay, let's dig a bit more into this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it can't be argued with. If we said, oh, we've done all these calculations and we think a human
Yes.
could run 5 marathons, they could argue
Yep.
against it. But you've done it. You've done five
Yeah.
marathons fasted. That's not an argument anymore. That's
Yeah, that's
gone.
right.
And it's
Yeah.
just looking at, okay, how. And also I think one of the things people within athletics could potentially argue is try and say, oh, well, was it optimal? Is it optimal performance?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
considering the fact that you'd never run a marathon before, you're not a regular runner, and the fact that you did 5 in 5 days, I would say that makes it very likely that you were performing pretty optimally, because most good runners would not be able to run 5 marathons in 5 days. So, I would think that you probably were performing very optimally for your ability and where you were at.
Yeah, which after like talking to anyone about what I've done, that's the next question. Like, is it optimal? Is that the best way?
Mm.
Look, for me, step one is, look, let's just start the premise of, is it possible or not? And we've done that. Your optimal argument, I think, then becomes a healthy one, which is, look, maybe it's not, maybe it is. I don't know, but you need to, well, not you, the world needs to wake up and say, there is another way to do this. And look, that's where I'd love some actual, real, genuine athletes and genuine runners to sort of run with this, pardon the pun, and say, look, okay, maybe I need to explore this a little bit more. And there are a lot of guys that are doing it. But the next question is, look, no one can do a sub 3 hour marathon if you were fasted, and until someone does, and then it's like, well, where do we go? But no one's going to be attempting that until there's these incremental steps of achievements where someone is doing something. So, look, I prefer to leave the what is optimal debate to like someone else at this stage, because my job was just putting it on people's radar to then at least have that conversation and show there is another way to do it. Look, carb loading works. World records have been set doing it that way, but here is another way if you follow another playbook. And you can't do half and half. Like, you either commit to one or the other. And we just haven't had I would say, the number of athletes commit to the low carb, keto, fat adapted approach to be able to really validate where it is. So, like, or the extent of how powerful well, your metabolism can be and how you can use it efficiently. So there's work to be done, but at least, this is a step in the right direction, what I've been able to achieve.
Absolutely. I think you've done a brilliant job of putting it out there, like you said, and hopefully people are going to pick that up and run with it. You would think that athletes and people within that space would be very interested in doing it, because especially for an athlete, that could be something that's going to give you an edge there. I
Yeah.
don't know if you're familiar with the work of Tim Noakes, but he's kind of done quite a lot of research within that space as well, on that not needing carbohydrates, and the fact that fat adapted athletes actually replenish their glycogen faster than carb athletes and things like that.
Yes.
So there's some work going on, but that paired with what you've done, hopefully it's going to move it forward. It's brilliant.
Look, his work was instrumental in helping me with my understanding and knowledge. So, yeah, Tim Noakes through the Nutrition Network has an entire course on a full lecture series on being fat adapted and how to go about doing it. So, I studied very hard. I was a big student of his in there, and listened very carefully, because when you set yourself an aggressive goal, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, okay, I need to really pay attention here and make sure I don't miss anything.
That's it. You want to make sure you do it right. Absolutely. In
Yeah,
fact, the Nutrition Network is actually where I came across your story, somewhere in there. So yeah, that's where I found you. They're doing
yeah,
great work there. Now I believe also you collected a lot of data during it, which I'm sure
yes.
is going to be
I
interesting. And
did.
so run us through some of the data you got and what that told you.
Yeah, sure. But before I do that, probably the reason why I took a lot of the data was because if I just did this and then just said, right, I've done it, a lot of, the naysayers were like, yeah, I don't believe you. Like, no, it's not possible. Like, what do we do? So data doesn't lie. So it's kind of, well, here's my numbers. So, this is really important to validate what I have done. The other part of that was my data, I think, is really important, just as a contribution to kind of the space, I suppose, because no one's ever done this before. Not 5 marathons. There are some guys that have done 4 marathons, and they've certainly planted the seed for me to be able to do this, and I thank them for what they've done. But the 5, no one's ever done it before. So what I actually tried to do before this was to approach some universities and say, look, could you use me as a guinea pig and do a research paper on what I'm going to do? Because I'm going to do it anyway. So stick all the needles in me you like and get whatever data you want, because you're smarter than I am. I'll just run, and that could be my contribution. So the feedback was, look, love it, but it's very difficult to get this through ethics approval, because it's just, and it might take 12 months. So for me, it was like, right, I'm ready to go. I want to do this on my clock. It's thank you, but all right, we tried. So failing that, it was like, well, I'll just collect my own data, so I have as much data as I possibly can. So what does data mean? There's the obvious stuff, which is, look, track it all with a GPS, with, it's all posted on my Strava to say, right, this is the distance that I covered, the speed, the heart rate, all of that sort of thing. But in terms of some other interesting things, I tracked my blood glucose for the entire 5 days. So I wore a CGM, so that told me by the minute what was my blood glucose. And I also track that using blood tests, so finger prick testing, which I would do before, so morning, so call it in the morning, pre-marathon, after the marathon around lunchtime, and then in the evening. And I did that for the 5 consecutive days. Plus, I did do a period prior for like to get my baseline, and then a period afterwards for a bit of a reset as well. So, and to talk about just the blood glucose, everyone, well, not everyone, but most people would say, look, you're not going to be able to do this because you're going to run out of glucose. Like, your brain needs it, your body needs it. I totally agree with all of that. But thanks to gluconeogenesis, your body is able to convert or create all of the glucose that it needs. So it's a demand-driven process. And I can tell you that my blood glucose was rock solid for all 5 days. So to the minute. So there were blips on a CGM, and if anyone's ever worn one, you'll understand. So I had a spike every morning about 6 o'clock, around that sort of that dawn effect, which was pretty consistent with all of my training. And the only time it ever spiked again was as I was finishing the 5th marathon. My blood glucose, so I would always sit between sort of 4.5 to 5.5. It spiked up to sort of 7.5 for probably the last hour of the marathon, which and for like a few hours afterwards. And I still hadn't eaten a thing. Like, it was just purely my body creating all the glucose it needed. So that was really fascinating. I did track my ketones as well. So again, using the finger prick testing. So all the way through, everyone in the low carb keto world loves their ketones. For me, it was a useful measure to be able to gauge if my body is in a state of ketosis, which I knew through my diet it would be, and the fasting would elevate that. But it provides a bit of confidence there, because I knew my body would be in the state that did mean it was adapted to running on fat. So what do my levels look like? Ordinarily, full carnivore, all my training prior, my ketone levels were sat between sort of 0.1 to 0.3 millimoles per liter, never ever higher than that. But once I started my fasting and my running, then they escalated pretty quickly. So they went from sort of 0.1 to, through the days, it was like 0.1, 1.8, and they spiked all the way up to 4.3 is where they got to for my final marathon. So they definitely ramped right up, which for me, ketones is never a goal. It's just an outcome, I suppose, and there's sort of no real target. But the fact that they were there, and the fasting and the work I was putting in, meant my body was definitely doing what I was expecting it to, and that was very reassuring. So yeah, ketones was the other thing. In terms of other stuff, I tracked my sleep. So using like an Aura ring, I would track how well I slept. I thought going into this 5 days of running and being exhausted, I'd crash into bed and I'd be fine. It was the complete opposite. I was either totally wired and couldn't sleep, but sleep became really problematic, which wasn't great. Like that made it quite difficult to get through each night, I would have to say, because I knew that my time for recovery was limited. So, but I've got all my data on my sleep metrics and everything. So by minute, how, heart rates and all the sort of fancy stuff, but got some great stuff on that. But I also tracked all my minerals. So using like urine strip testing. So I would test everything from my sort of salt, magnesium, potassium, calcium, ketones again, all of that stuff. So it's not the most accurate way to test the urine testing, but it does give me a relative measure. So against my baseline. So if things were going out of whack, I could see that and see where I needed to sort of top up. But generally, all of that was pretty rock solid because I was really cranking up my salt intake during that period to make sure that I was not running out of electrolytes and keeping those stores, quite high. So that was all quite good. I did have one problem one day where let's call it overhydrated. So I had a problem because my sodium levels dropped a lot. That was during the night after marathon 2. And that, involved me sort of really cranking the salt tablets and cranking the salt back up to get me back to baseline. And I felt terrible during the night, but after a bit of time and some salt, that really brought me back. So what other data did I get? The other really interesting part was everyone wants to know how much weight did you lose? Like, did you track your weight? So that was it. I obviously did. So I did a full body DEXA scan the day prior to my 5 marathons, and I did one the day after my 5th marathon. So I have very, very good data for what my change in body composition was over that period. And surprisingly, so again, I was pretty lean, 75 kilos, 11 kilos of fat on me. I lost in total 3 kilograms of fat. Oh, sorry, 3 kilograms of weight. And of that, it was 1 kilogram of fat. And according to DEXA, the other 2 kilograms is what they describe as lean tissue, which is the combination of muscle fiber, glycogen, and water. So all 3 of those. So it's not just tissue itself. So the bit of the joke there is, look, I now could put my hand up and say I've done the most extreme version of eat less and move more. It is the most inefficient way to lose weight. It is a horrifically inefficient way to do it. I don't recommend anyone to ever try and do it, or do what I did for those reasons, because it's not going to work. So I was astounded that I only used 1 kilogram of fat that fueled me for that entire period. So that really blew my mind. So, and the final thing was, look, I had bloods done before and after. So my lead doctor on this was Dr. Paul Mason, who some of your listeners may be familiar with, because he's very, very, very intelligent guy, and is quite a name in the low carb space, but absolutely brilliant. So I said to him, look, any tests you need to run on me before, let's write those. We did that, and then we did it again afterwards to see what the change was. So, and look, his view was I did have some some of my numbers went a little bit crazy, but not out of realm of what anyone that would have had they done the amount of volume that I did. So for anyone doing that, he said, look, I've seen a lot worse numbers in that period from people doing a hell of a lot less than what I did. So look, there was some inflammation because my body had just been through, well, a very big ask, put it that way. So
Yeah.
All of that data, it's fascinating. So look, I'm hoping that it is all there. I do have a website, which ketomarathons.com, which if anyone wants to have a look at any of that stuff, it's all there. That that data, I think, is useful for others to go, right, like what actually happens. It's the first time anyone's been able to see what happens to someone's body when they go through a period of 5 days of fasting and 5 complete marathons.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the blood glucose as well is a really big one for me, because that's the one that people always talk about. You got to have the glucose, where you're going to get it from. And,
Yeah.
they say, oh, well, maybe your body can make some for a little bit, but, you've had 5 whole days, no food in, and your blood glucose has been rock solid while you've been running 5 marathons. And that shows
Yeah.
that our body doesn't need the external source of glucose. If you want to give your body external glucose, fine, but that just proves that it doesn't need it to do that. That's an
Yes.
extreme thing you've done, and
Yeah.
it's been absolutely fine. And you said at the end of the 5th one, it even spiked up.
Yeah.
So that puts that to bed over whether we can produce that, and while doing exercise, not even just 5 days fasted, you're pushing your body to the limits for 5 days, and your
Yes.
blood glucose is absolutely fine. So that's brilliant. That one, I agree with you on ketones. I don't think people should obsess over it if they eat our way of life. You're fat adapted, you're running on fat. I think people can get obsessed with stuff like that. I think it's completely right to ignore it. And so I wonder how obviously you said you had, did you say that you had about 11 kilograms of fat on you before you lost 1 kilogram running fives? I'm just working out how that ties in with how many marathons you think you could have run with the calories
Well, yeah,
and
based
your
on
weight.
that, it's like I probably could have
That's
done
even
11
more, isn't
times
it?
what I did. It's exactly. So, it's a hypothetical calc, but
Yeah,
look, if the numbers going into it said I could have done 22 based on the calorie metric, based on my DEXA scan fat utilization, which is very, very accurate. Yeah, it could be a multiple of that number. So, my message is unchanged, whatever that number happens to be. It is our body, the store of energy on our body is enormous. Like it is orders of magnitude larger than what anyone would comprehend is possible.
absolutely. And I think I heard you on another podcast saying about it's a really good example of how effective our body is at using the fat for energy. The fact
Yes.
that for those 5 days you only used 1 kilogram of fat, that's really not that much, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and look, it's probably an interesting point too, which to get a little bit sciencey here, but I think it's a valuable point to make. So often people say, look, when someone is like carb adapted or running on carbs, they're using purely carbs for energy, and if someone's fat adapted, they're using purely fat for energy. That is not the case. Like in all cases for everybody, you're using a blend. But the idea is, or the difference between those two metabolisms is when you're fat adapted, you're now converting fat to energy at a faster rate than you otherwise would have been had you been carb adapted. And so,
Yeah.
what does that mean, or how do you translate that? It is, look, when you're carb adapted, you are burning carbohydrates at a very high rate. It's about 2.9 grams per minute, and your fat you're burning at about 0.5, so very, very low. Which is when you're only using a 2,000 calorie store of energy, you burn through that really quickly. And when you do, that's what hitting the wall is. Like, I'm now out of energy. Your body's saying, "Nah, you got no energy here. I can't convert what you've got fast enough to keep going. So you need to give me some of the good stuff that I like, which is I'm referencing I prefer carbohydrates, so give me some of that. When you're fat adapted, you are burning, your rates of oxidation of those fuel sources balance out. So they become about 1.3 grams per minute for both carbs and both fat. So very, very efficient. So you're not burning your carbs as quick as you were before, which is fine because it's a very small fuel tank, but you're burning your fats now much, much faster. So it's about, so 1.3, you're about 2 to 2.5 times faster rate of being able to convert that fat to energy, which is why you feel like you have more energy, because you don't hit that stage where your body says, hang on, where we can't convert our fuel to energy fast enough here, we've run out, because it's very efficient in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's oxidation is another rates is another thing that Tim Noakes has done quite a bit of work on, isn't it? I think
Yeah.
within athletes. And so obviously for people who are maybe an athlete, maybe just a part-time athlete, and who are interested in looking at this, how long would you, obviously beforehand you were kind of fat adapted anyway, but in
Yes.
general, do you have an idea of roughly how long it takes someone to become fat adapted? Because I know that people who've maybe just gone a really short time dropping carbs and they say, oh, I felt, a bit lower in energy, but that's because they've not adapted yet. Do you have like a rough idea of how long it takes?
Yeah, so I would say, like, as a general rule, it would be sort of 3 to 4 weeks would be all it would take. And that's the period where, look, they talk about keto flu, which is
Mm.
that period where you're adjusting. I don't like that term. I think like overcoming carb addiction is what it is. It's like that period of, right, if I was on a hard drug and I need to come out of it, I'm not getting onto healthy living flu. It is, I'm coming off, a
Yeah.
um a dependency. So, and that's the withdrawal symptoms of that. So let's call the keto flu that's the carb withdrawal
Carb withdrawal, that's
period.
it.
So it's that carb withdrawal. So it's that sort of 3 weeks is that period. And now I would say that if anyone tried to say that they were fat adapted inside that, I would say you're really not. And they're like, well, I tried it, I didn't have any energy, and it wasn't for for me. You didn't get through the withdrawal period and you have to get through. So it's about that 3 to 4 weeks and then you get there. And it's not, there is that light switch moment where it's like, right, I feel amazing now. I've got more energy than ever. And then from there, it extends. Like it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going. So the longer you do it, the more benefit you get, the faster you're able to convert your fat to energy, the more efficient it becomes. So it's that 3 to 4 weeks to get there. And then from there, the longer you stay in that stage, the better you get at it. So for me, it was, again, the 5 marathons. I was like, look, if I can, given my base, another 3 to 4 months should be enough. So call it sort of 8 to 12 weeks is where I would say would be enough to be able to do some serious endurance, workload. So there's the physical like attributes around how fast and what you can do, but to be able to tap into the energy to be able to do something extraordinary like that, I would say sort of 8 to 12 weeks.
Yeah. And I think I've seen in sort of research and case studies as well, like you said about the improvements continuing even up to like a year. I think, people are still getting improved results. So as you said, the longer you're on it, the better and better you keep getting. Right.
Yes.
That is brilliant. I've absolutely loved this episode. I've really wanted to get you on. Ever since I saw it, like I said, I just want to get people talking about it and thinking about it. So listen, but before you leave us, remind us one more time where we can find you, and just give us the message that you want people to take from this and go forwards with.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the message. So for me, what I did was around demonstrating that there is another way that our bodies can perform. So when someone does cut all the carbohydrates and becomes fat adapted, your body will unlock an enormous amount of energy. So my message is, it's not run marathons. I'm not telling anyone to do that. I don't think that's an important part about it at all. For me, it is, for anyone, this is available to anyone. If anyone can unlock that amount of energy, just think about how you could apply that amount of energy to your life, because it feels like a superpower. So my message is, look, please give it a go. Give being fat adapted a go. Stick with it for a period that is beyond 3 weeks to be able to truly understand what it's like when you get through the other side of it. I think the big thing is, at the end of the day, look, if we can cut out all the processed garbage and we can move our way more towards sort of a healthy way of eating, and please, can we move beyond that idea of like carb loading? Like the idea of, look, every mum and dad sort of gives their kids a bag of lollies before they run their 100 meters at their school athletics carnival. Like that is not necessary. And that messaging, particularly at that age, that's propagating that ideology, I would say. So it would be, understand this, how do I apply it for myself, and how can I really tap into these energy reserves by being fat adapted? So where can you find me? I do have a website. All of my data and everything about what I've done, including some videos and all that sort of stuff, is on my website. So that's ketomarathons.com. And I do post on socials, mainly on Insta, again, at Keto Marathons. On X as well, which is keto_marathons, and on Facebook for the same handle at Keto Marathons.
Awesome. That is brilliant. We'll share all of your links in the show notes so people can easily find you. And, I really hope and encourage people that they are going to, look into this, open your minds and see, this has been done. It's not a discussion anymore. It's not an argument. It's been done. Now we got to move forwards and see how you can apply it to your life. Like Alex said, that's definitely the way to do it. So Alex, again, thank you so much for giving us your time today, and hopefully you've enjoyed being here.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. All right. That's it for this week, everybody. We will see you again next week. And until then, let's get optimal together.